The relationship between dreams and consciousness is, I think that we could actually say that we are dreaming all of the time. It's just that during wakefulness, our dreams are shaped by stimulus information that's coming through our senses. Whereas during dreaming, the same consciousness within our brains is not shaped by any external information, but it's generated internally. So I think that, well, life is a dream which is guided by the senses.
Yeah, why not? Okay. Yeah, physiology of sleep. This is when we're going to hit the biology part, because we have to hit a foundation here. Why do we sleep to begin with? What brings it on? And through here, we're going to kind of start to piece together things that may disrupt sleep. But in this section, we're just going to hit the components of what causes it and the cycles of sleep. We're going to find a lot of pieces here we're going to keep coming back to as we go through. The first slide you see here of the brain and the physiology of sleep, that one we're going to keep coming back to because it has many different components to it that we're going to use later on, especially in the dreaming section. But first off, we have to get what knocks you out. Why do you go out at night? And the first problem, anytime we're studying something from an empirical standpoint, our first problem is we have to define it. We actually have to put in an operational definition so we can say, here's this thing we're studying. A lot of things seem like they'd be a lot of fun to study, right? But once we get into it, we have to define it, and then we can kind of bog down on it. Defining sleep has always been a problem because as it says in the fourth bullet down there, to jump down for a moment, sleep is not consistent. There are different aspects and different patterns we'll see to different stages of it, especially REM sleep, as it says there. Neurologically, as far as brainwave patterns, looks very similar to the waking brain. In fact, it's trying to send a lot of motor commands to the rest of the body. So is sleep just being unconscious? Lack of conscious self-awareness? Can't just be that, because a lot of times we are self-aware within the dreams. Even if you're not having a lucid dream in which you're consciously aware you're dreaming, you still quite often have a sense of self in your dream. You're aware of what's going on around you. So it can't simply be that. Is it not responding to an environmental stimulus? Well, sometimes that's true. We're going to find there are different patterns in the brain waves, especially something that's going to be called later K-complexes in the patterns that seem to be responses to environmental stimulus coming in that plays a role into whether or not that stimulus is going to break through and be processed or not. So that's all been kind of a problem there. The last bullet, is sleep a state of consciousness or is it a physiological state? There's an easy answer to that one. It's both. It is a physiological state which causes a certain state of consciousness. So for our purposes, we have to come up with a definition of sleep that we're going to use throughout this, and here's how we're going to do it. Reduced or absent reactivity to sensory input. Sometimes you don't respond to outside stimuli at all. Sometimes you do. We'll find that will cycle through. Low or absent motor output, which means you're laying there, your eyes are closed, you don't seem to be moving. Diminished or absent conscious awareness. So again, those three things combined kind of cover what we're going to call sleep as we go through here. Now this may raise a question, what about coma? Is a coma just being asleep? So we got a little slide here to kind of hit that. In sleep, we see definite cycles, and we can see changes in brainwave activity through those cycles. And for example, in REM sleep, we mentioned neural activity is similar to when you're awake, but it's in REM. In fact, the entire definition of REM is rapid eye movement. We can actually see your eyes moving under your eyelids during REM sleep. And in sleep, even if it's sometimes difficult, we can wake you from it. We may have to shake you and yell at you, and you may wake up kind of groggy, but we can wake you from that state. Coma does not have the same cycles, and when we say it is consistent and persistent, it means it stays very stable for long periods of time, and you cannot wake the person from it. They also show a lack of any response to external stimulation. Which brings us to a subset in coma called a vegetative state. And you may hear things like persistent vegetative state. It's kind of like coma, except a person in a vegetative state may show cycles that look like sleep. They will make automatic responses to the environment. Whereas in your standard coma, the person looks asleep. In a vegetative state, the person may actually open their eyes and look around the room. They may follow motion through the room as someone walks past. They may occasionally make emotional expressions. They may smile or laugh. The problem is they don't seem to be doing that consistently to external stimuli. It seems to be a lot of just spontaneous and automatic brainstem function going on there. So let's hit the big part here. What causes sleep? Where in your brain do we have the triggers that are going to knock you out and put you to sleep? We're going to focus in primarily on the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and the areas around that. Upper top part of the brain stem. The thalamus, which if you took general psych is called the sensory switchboard. That's where a lot of information coming in from the senses hits the thalamus and is processed out through there. One area in particular, actually it is a cluster of areas, the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, an area around the hypothalamus that sends signals when it's ready for you to fall asleep. It sends signals to arousal areas. And let's take a look at a chart here. You see right there on the far left where it says the VLPO and it says GABA. That is the origin point where signals will follow this path down, and we're just looking at the initial kind of purple ones there to kind of inhibit arousal areas. A lot of that pathway is involved in arousal, but it's that early VLPO area that starts triggering GABA, which is a neural inhibitor as far as other neurotransmitters which will excite activity. GABA will reduce activity. If you've ever heard of the drug gabapentin, it kind of mimics GABA and helps reduce activity. It's used a lot in treatment of anxiety, in seizure activity. It's kind of part of that. Now, kind of looking ahead here, planting a little seed for the future, look at those kind of grayed out labels at the bottom where it says hypothalamus, the pons, and the medulla. Pay attention to the pons, because that is going to be particularly important later when we talk about REM sleep and why the active brain in REM is not sending signals to the rest of the body. The pons is the point that's going to interrupt those signals. So we have kind of a domino effect here that starts that movement towards sleep. And it is not an instantaneous response. We're going to hit later that we can start to see at different points of waking, some regions of the brain may start to show sleep-like brainwave activity communicating with each other. That is when you're going to feel tired or groggy, or as we're going to see on the slide later, when you're zoning out. Those are those functions working in there. But the thalamus, the hypothalamus, most especially the pineal gland, are going to trigger this off. And where it really triggers off is your eyes. Yeah, there's been all sorts of talk for a long time about what triggers the circadian rhythm. Do we need to shine lights behind your kneecaps or under your elbow? None of that ever made sense, considering that we wear clothes and we darken those areas all the time. There are receptor cells in the eyes that detect light, specifically sunlight, cause the pineal gland to either produce or stop producing melatonin. Melatonin is a primary hormone here involved in stimulating this response. This is where these triggers start up. So we have a graphic here that shows light coming in through the eye. If we are picking up sunlight, we are inhibiting the production of melatonin. If we are not picking up sunlight, we are encouraging the production of melatonin. And this is where we start to program the cycle of what is called the biological clock. And again, we noted on the previous slide something called the circadian rhythm in that case, which alters over time. And we're going to find there's a lot of variations in individuals' circadian rhythm. So this starts that process as it moves on. Now, does the brain all go to sleep at once? There's two things going on here. One is the idea of global sleep, and that is when we would all agree that you are completely asleep. Your eyes are closed, you're relatively motionless. When we're looking at brainwave activity, we will see the activity that shows us the stages of sleep. But we can also have, as we just mentioned, localized sleep. You can find it when you're sleep deprived. You find it as you're approaching sleep and struggling to stay awake. That feeling that's causing you to feel groggy or sleepy and feel like you're fighting to stay awake is because some regions of your brain are actually starting to go to sleep. They are starting to show those typical brainwave patterns. Okay, so here we have kind of a diagram of the thalamus. And the reason we have this, because an entire kind of cell around the thalamus, thalamic reticular nucleus, it's often called, even though there's not really a nucleus to it, kind of, again, this area around the thalamus does seem to be involved in directing different areas of the brain to head off into sleep. Okay, so what indicators do we have when you're asleep? You've probably heard of the measures of brainwave activity, the different patterns. We're going to see a brief clip here, 2-minute neuroscience on the sleep stages, but I do want to set a stage before we go in here. Depending on how long ago you took general psych, if you took it, or what kind of study you've done in sleep, you may have heard of 4 stages of sleep and REM. That we start in stage 1, which is very shallow. We go down to stage 2, 3, 4, which is the deepest stage, and then we come back up, 3, 2, but instead of going into 1, we go into REM sleep, and then we repeat that cycle. Every around 90 minutes to 110 minutes, we'll complete that cycle. When you come back up to REM, that's where you either go back down or you may briefly wake up for a while after that. So if you manage to navigate a nap that takes you down through stage 4 and up, and you manage to wake up after REM, you can wake up very refreshed. If you wake up somewhere in the deeper stages, you can wake up very groggy. Now, I mentioned 4 stages. We do not recognize 4 stages anymore. Research did not support a differentiation between stages 3 and 4. So we now have 3 stages, 1, 2, 3, and then you come back up 2, 1, and then REM. And we're going to see as we go on later, a lot of researchers simply refer to REM sleep and non-REM sleep. They'll put all 3 of those stages into one. So let's take a look at a brief video on sleep stages.
Sleep stages are defined based on the measurement of electrical activity in the brain using an electroencephalogram, or EEG. An EEG represents fluctuations in brain electrical activity in voltage as a waveform of variable frequency and amplitude. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine classifies sleep as consisting of 4 stages. The first two stages involve light sleep. When someone begins to fall asleep, they enter stage 1, during which an EEG records low amplitude waves of mixed but mostly high frequencies. Next, the person enters stage 2 sleep. This is characterized by the presence of phenomena on an EEG known as sleep spindles and K complexes. Sleep spindles are trains of high-frequency waves. The K complex involves a biphasic wave that stands out from the rest of the EEG.
Yeah, let's take a moment here to talk about these because these are going to come back a lot. Stage 2 is the stage that we tend to spend the most amount of time in over the course of an entire, if you sleep a normal span of sleep, between 7 and 9 hours, whatever's normal for you, stage 2 is the stage you'll spend the most time in. So what are sleep spindles and K complexes? What are they? As I mentioned, we're going to keep coming back to these because they are relevant later on. Sleep spindles seem to be activity that aids in the processing of memory, because an area of the brain involved in long-term memory, the hippocampus, is very involved in that. We're going to find later on in the functions of sleep, memory processing is a big thing going on while you're sleeping, and sleep spindles seem to be directly related to that. K complexes are related to something I mentioned in the introduction. Why can you sleep through a lot of noise, but some other noise, such as your alarm clock or baby crying, will pop you awake right away? That seems to be involved with the K complexes. They pop up in response to external stimuli. So I'm laying there in stage 2 sleep, and someone comes into the room or makes a noise in the house. If I'm expecting that, if that's not unusual, the K complex responds to that and keeps me asleep. But if it's picking up that what's coming in is my alarm clock, the K complex seems to process that, let that one through, and that one will wake me up. Both of these, as we're going to see later, have a component involved in memory. So again, sleep spindle and K complexes. You see they both have a different look to them. Sleep spindles very small, very close together. K complexes kind of a spikier, larger hit to them. Let's go on with this.
Stage 3 sleep is also known as slow wave sleep or deep sleep. In stage 3, delta waves, which are low frequency, high amplitude waves, make up at least 20% of brain activity. Stage 3 sleep is thought to be especially important to overall restfulness. Next, the sleeper passes rapidly back through stage 2 and stage 1 before entering rapid eye movement or REM sleep. In REM sleep, EEG activity resembles what's seen in stage 1 or restful waking. During REM sleep, the muscles are completely relaxed and limp, but the eyes are moving rapidly. This is the time of sleep when our most vivid dreams are likely to occur. After REM sleep, the person will sometimes awaken briefly, but then will move through the sleep stages again in order. Most people will repeat this cycle 4 to 5 times a night, with each cycle lasting about 90 to 110 minutes.
Yeah, another thing in REM sleep, which you just kind of briefly mentioned there, you are functionally paralyzed during REM sleep. The pons cuts off motor signals going to the rest of the body. Part of the function of that, the reason for that, is during REM sleep you are actually sending motor commands. The entire brain is exercising and active there. It was thought for a long time that dreams only occur in REM. We're going to find later in the dreams section, dreams occur in every stage of sleep. You start having them as soon as you fall asleep. The REM dreams are likely to be the ones that are most intense, though, most vivid, and create the greatest emotional response. Now, looking at this chart here, notice again how the cycle and the time you spend in each stage changes over the course of the night. So by the end of the evening, if you again sleep an entire 7 or 8 hours, you're spending little or no time in deep stage 3 sleep, but you're spending a lot of time in REM at the end. That's one of the reasons that if you wake up early in the morning, let's say my alarm is set to go off at 5 and I wake up at 4:30 in the morning and go back to sleep, or say it's a day off and I just keep going back to sleep, I'm going to have mostly REM after that. I'm most likely to have my more intense, memorable dreams after that. Again, as we mentioned before, if you happen to wake up at the end of one of those cycles after a REM cycle, you can wake up very refreshed, or at least more refreshed. It's easier to wake up and get functioning right away. If you wake up during a stage 3, your deepest area, it is harder to come out of that. Stage 2, not as sluggish, but still more sluggish. So in our introduction, when we talked about how sometimes you can wake from a nap and feel refreshed, other times you're dragging for a long time, it's probably because if you woke in a stage 3, for some reason, external stimuli, for some reason, it takes you a while to pull back out of that. And again, because we'll hit this again in dreams, something called dream paralysis or sleep paralysis, because you are functionally paralyzed when you're in REM sleep, if you wake suddenly from REM, it can take a while for the pons to return function, motor function to the rest of the body, and you will not be able to move for a little while after that. Now we're kind of hitting a bit ahead here, just for future reference. We have a slide here showing different behavioral states and conscious experiences with the different stages, and you can see here they've broken it down into REM and non-REM. We'll be coming back to that as we go through, but that's there for your reference right now. And again, they showed the pattern, the sleep patterns in the previous one. Here's another chart showing the patterns you'll see in stage 2. And on here, again, look at stage 2. It says C3, C4, P3, P4. Look at the little top of the skull in the top left. It's showing you where those measurements were taken from. So you can see there are some variations. And then this is an older one. It's showing stage 3/stage 4 there from the same locations. You can definitely see the patterns are different there. We're going to be looking at this a lot as we go back through later, especially when we talk about dreams. Now here are some fMRI patterns looking at transitions. At the top there, you see, and again, fMRI is kind of like Doppler radar, kind of shows you activity in different areas. When we go from waking to non-REM sleep, which from waking to non-REM, you're going to go waking to stage 1. By the time we go down to the deepest stage of sleep and come back, which is that second line from non-REM to REM, you see things get very active there. And again, the brain is about as active in REM sleep as it is in waking sleep, and you just see a cascade of activity. Then from REM sleep to being awake, very similar, a lot of frontal lobe activity in there. And of course, on the bottom right one, you're seeing a lot of activity in the back of the brain. A lot of that is the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe, which does visual processing. So definite identifiable patterns as we go through there. So we mentioned localized sleep. We can find certain areas of the brain will fit. When we look at those brainwave patterns, we can find some regions of the brain starting to show those patterns before other regions do. It's as if parts of the brain are already communicating with each other before the rest of the brain is asleep. And as it says here on the slide, that is thought to be associated with memory. Again, we'll be hitting that in the next section, but it can also occur when you're awake. If you're just, like we said earlier, feeling groggy, feeling sleepy, or zoning out, that's likely a localized sleep experience of two areas of the brain communicating in what would otherwise be sleep brainwave patterns. Again, there's some sort of communication going on there. So we get this cycle going on. What regulates that cycle? So we come right back to circadian rhythm in this case, which probably you've heard of melatonin being involved in that. Again, the pineal gland is what releases and processes melatonin. Melatonin is derived in the body primarily from tryptophan and serotonin. You've probably heard of tryptophan in relation to turkey and Thanksgiving. You've Probably heard people say, oh, that's why we get tired after that big Thanksgiving dinner, because of the tryptophan in the turkey. A lot of foods have tryptophan in them. A lot have more than turkey does. Milk has more tryptophan than turkey. You don't get tired after your Thanksgiving dinner because of tryptophan. You get tired because you just ate a huge meal, and your digestive system is actually pulling energy away from other systems to try to process that huge meal you just brought in. That's primarily what's going on there. You've probably heard of melatonin as a dietary supplement. You can buy it at the grocery store. People will take it sometimes as a sleep aid. Is that a problem? Does taking melatonin interfere with the natural production of melatonin from the pineal gland? At the moment, research says no. It doesn't seem to create a problem there. But if you were to take melatonin every night to try to help you sleep, you will habituate to it. It will have less of effect. Again, melatonin is not a sleeping pill. All it is a hormone that helps trigger the sleep response. Now, melatonin itself actually processes out of your body pretty quickly. It has a high half-life of about 40 minutes, and then it's gone. So, an hour and a half maybe after you've taken that melatonin, your body's processed it through. So, does not seem to interfere with the pineal gland, but again, it's not a sleeping pill itself. As a matter of fact, quite often it may have more of a placebo effect than an active effect in helping you sleep. If you're anxious about not being able to sleep and you're confident that melatonin will help you, then just taking it helps relieve some of that anxiety, and that can actually help you sleep more than the melatonin does. There's also been a lot of study on electromagnetic fields interfering with the pineal gland. This argument, again, electromagnetic fields given off by anything electrical. The closest we keep to ourselves are cell phones, televisions, lights. Do those interfere with the pineal gland? There was an argument that it can react to electromagnetic fields as if it's perceiving light, and therefore reduce its natural production of melatonin. We can't really go there at this point because different research has been mixed. Some have found some differences in melatonin production from the pineal gland in people exposed to electromagnetic fields. Others have found no response to it. So that's still a mixed response. But what does cause some people to kind of assume that's a true connection is that if I'm sitting there on my cell phone looking at stuff when I want to go to sleep, I may have trouble going to sleep if I'm watching television. It's not necessarily the electromagnetic field from those devices doing that. It's the stimulation and the interaction you get from it that's doing that, especially looking at any screen, because the occipital lobe in the back of the brain, where all of your visual processing happens, really is stimulated by looking at a screen. So whether it's a cell phone screen, a computer screen, a TV screen, that does cause a lot of stimulation in that cortex. So later on, when we look at sleep disorders, we will look at circadian rhythm sleep disorder, but we'll plant a little nutshell here. For most people, you work into a 24-hour cycle as far as your body gearing you towards sleep, gearing you awake again, and then that gradual progression back towards sleep. Some of you may be very consistent to the point that you go to bed or feel sleepy about the same time every night. You may be so consistent that when you first open your eyes in the morning, you can tell what time it is before you even look at the clock. That is very stable and consistent circadian rhythm, although that can sometimes fluctuate. We'll talk later about time perception in sleep, why sometimes you can wake up and realize you've been asleep for a long time and look at the clock and not be surprised at the time. Other times you may wake up and be completely off as in your estimate of how long you've been asleep. But in circadian rhythm disorder, in a nutshell, your 24-hour rhythm does not fit a 24-hour day. Or the rhythm that your body has does not fit the requirements of your day. And this is where we get into the issue of how early school starts, and whether most people's circadian rhythm is ready to be up and performing at that hour of the morning, or whether people would be better if we delayed start a little while. You may find, especially, and we've mentioned this one before, if you're in an environment where there are no external requirements as far as when you need to get up or when you need to go out and do something, you may find you have more than a 24-hour cycle there, that you're staying up an extra couple hours every night and you're kind of working your way around the clock. That is only a disorder in the sense that it doesn't fit in with how you want your sleep-wake cycle to be. So jet lag is similar to circadian rhythm sleep disorder, in which that rhythm gets off. The difference is jet lag is environmentally caused. We know what causes that. In circadian rhythm disorder, we would find it is an alteration or disruption in that without any other known cause to it. We will hit that when we do our section on sleep disorders. Okay, so we got brain regions, primarily the thalamus and the hypothalamus, that start triggering that. All right, the eyes pick up light, and it has to be a certain magnitude of light, generally sunlight. Most residential lighting that you would just have in your rooms is not bright enough to disrupt your circadian rhythm. If it was, everyone's rhythm would be off because we are all exposed to artificial light. Has to be of a certain intensity, but there's a little difference there. If you get into a light that is on a blue spectrum, that can throw it off. Some of the LED, very white lights that seem to mimic sunlight can throw it off. Some people, they find when they put blue lights out on their porch for Christmas decorations, they get this perception that that's constant twilight, and that tends to throw their circadian rhythm off. So that blue spectrum can seem to mess things up as we go along the way. All right, let's back up a minute. We know that humans sleep. Do all animals sleep? As far as we know, yes. But there's a lot of variation in how long they sleep and their patterns of sleep, which are not similar to humans. Got a quick video here. Let's take a look at some different sleep patterns in different animals.
Number 10. Bullfrogs. They are one of the few creatures on Earth that quite possibly never sleeps. It's been observed that from time to time they do go into a period of rest and relaxation, but during it they respond to extreme stimuli, like a shock, in the same way they do when they're wide awake. Number 9. Dolphins. The aquatic mammals have an ability to sort of take a snooze yet stay in motion. The phenomenon is called Unihemispheric, or one-sided sleep, and during such times of rest only part of the brain goes into slumber mode. Number 8. Giraffes. They're pretty and peaceful animals, but they're also on the most wanted lists of a couple of very fierce predators, lions and crocodiles. As a means of self-defense through vigilance, giraffes only sleep for a few winks at a time and seldom get more than 20 minutes of Z's per day. Number 7. Alpine swifts. Researchers outfitted a few of these birds with sensors and learned that they are capable of staying in flight for a bit over 6 months. That means no coming down for food, water, or to rest. It's guessed they either doze off seasonally or when flight conditions permit. Number 6. Sharks. Despite the many rumors circulating that sharks never sleep, whether they do or not is debatable. Though they don't enter a state that's similar to the one most animals experience, they do partake in some slow, quiet time, often near the ocean floor. They just look super alert while they're doing it because they don't have eyelids to close. Number 5. Earthworms. Among their few known periods of rest is a phase called diapause, in which they curl up and enclose themselves in mucous membranes. The worms do it to stay moist during times of drought, emerging only when the ground's hydration level rebounds. Number 4. Elephant seals. When in water with no land in sight, they grab short naps by sinking away from the sea's surface and out of their enemies' reaches. They begin by grabbing some air and flopping onto their backs. From there, they spiral towards the bottom until it's time to start swimming again. Number 3. Flamingos. They sleep with one eye open. Seriously. They can put one brain hemisphere to rest at a time, leaving the other fully functioning, eyeball and all. They don't always do it. Typically they work in shifts, allowing each in the group to get in some quality and total shut-eye time. Number 2. Horses. Though sleeping while standing up doesn't sound very restful, horses are able to do it because they have what's called a stay apparatus. It allows tendons and ligaments to hold the leg upright while the muscles get some rest and relaxation. Horses take advantage of the ability when they're awake as well to minimize fatigue. Number 1. Newborn killer whales. Sleep deprivation would be detrimental to the health of a human child, but these whale babies have no problem staying awake for a month on end. In their case, it actually makes the brain stronger, and the extra movement compensates for their low supply of blubber. A substance serves as insulation from the cold ocean waters.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, now the idea of unihemispheric sleep is really interesting. We see it in some whales, not all of them, some sharks, not all of them, some birds, not all of them. The idea of unihemispheric sleep is the idea that one hemisphere can sleep while the other one stays awake. And in a lot of animals that experience this, what you will see while they're sleeping is one eye is open and the other is not. And then when the other hemisphere is sleeping, the other eye will close and the other one will be open, literally sleeping with one eye open. It allows each part of the brain to rest and do its work while the other one is still up and functioning. Let's take a look at an example of this. Yeah, that's thought in some species of birds why they can fly for so long without having to stop and rest, that they can essentially keep flying while half the brain at any given time is resting. Now, there's some variations in here. Let's take a look at a couple different species of whales. Sperm whales were thought for a long time to be unihemispheric sleep creatures that just swam all the time and did not do anything we would call sleep. Turns out they do. And it's a little bit creepy looking. I'm not sure I'd want to come upon it. Let's take a look at the sperm whales.
For years, scientists believed that whales slept with half of their brains still functioning, allowing them to stay alert in the case of predators. However, this all changed when a group of researchers stumbled upon an unusual and eerie group of sleeping sperm whales in the Caribbean in 2008. The whales were sleeping, but nothing like had ever been observed in captivity. The whales were sleeping standing up, in an odd vertical position clustered in groups of 5 or so. But this wasn't the weirdest thing about the cluster of creatures. The most unusual aspect was how unaware they were of the researchers' presence. As the researchers drifted closer, they continued to float motionless, seemingly in a state of paralysis. The boat of researchers tried to slowly move out of the way of the whales without disturbing them, for they feared that if awoken, they might try to defend themselves and possibly sink the boat. Not all went according to plan, however. The boat slowly drifted into the whales and awoke one of the sleeping giants. Luckily for the researchers, after the whole pod was awoken, they all swam away. This encounter rewrote how we understand whales sleep in the wild. The general scientific consensus around whale biology was that they slept somewhat aware and somewhat motionless, but nothing like the researchers found. When Patrick Miller, a researcher at the University of St. Andrews, first saw the footage from the chance encounter, some previous data he had collected began to make sense. He and a team of other researchers had attached suction cup data loggers to a group of 59 sperm whales to monitor their behavior. To their surprise, they found that the whales had spent just 7% of their time drifting motionless in the water. Connecting this with the newfound footage, Miller was able to connect this odd vertical sleeping to the period of motionless drifting he observed in his data. Researchers now understand that sperm whales seem to sleep fully vertical while drifting near the surface or at about 10 meters below the water. They take brief naps throughout the day lasting for about 10 to 15 minutes each, during which they do not breathe or move. The most shocking thing about this finding is just how little the researchers determined that the whales sleep. At just 7% of inactivity, sperm whales may be the least sleep-dependent animal on Earth.
Yeah. Oh. Now we got two different breeds of sharks to look at here. You've probably heard that sharks have to keep swimming. or they'll basically drown. They have to keep water moving across their gills. That's actually not true. They actually have a pump mechanism, a lot of them, that they can be still and still move water across. Let's take a look first at these reef sharks that do just basically lay down at the bottom of the ocean and sleep. Now, in opposition to that are the great white sharks, which do seem to stay in motion. And you'll see an example here of a great white that basically orients itself toward the current, so water is still moving across, but very likely is engaged in unihemispheric sleep at this point. So they do seem kind of out of it because their entire brain is not functioning at any given time. One half is sleeping, then the other half sleeps. Let's take a look at this one.
The SharkCam team is witnessing a dramatic shift in white shark behavior. At 8:30, they see something no one's ever seen before. Emma's jaws gape open. She appears to be in an almost catatonic state. Could Emma be napping? Has the SharkCam team discovered what white sharks do at night? Facing into the current, with her mouth open, oxygen-rich water flows over Emma's gills. It allows her to slow down and save energy for her hunting during the day. But she can never stop swimming completely, or she'll sink to the bottom, suffocate, and die.
Yeah, so we've kind of covered what gets us to sleep. What about what wakes us up? A lot of different things wake us up. Exiting a REM cycle can wake you up. Stress can wake you up. Why does stress wake you up? It's part of the overall cycle of the hormones that put you to sleep. Again, tryptophan and serotonin are triggering that. Melatonin is triggering that. But let's talk about the stress hormone, cortisol, right? The one that's associated with stress. Now, keep in mind, cortisol does not cause stress. Cortisol is a response to stress, but it does create that sensation that goes with the body that we call a stress sensation. Cortisol peaks right around the time you wake up in the morning. It's thought to be the primary hormone that kind of brings you out of sleep and makes you alert. Cortisol decreases throughout the day. So if you're getting a spike of cortisol early, you will wake up due to that. So that can cause it. Again, the sleep-inducing hormones, as they kind of go away, as other systems in the brain have had their time to do their job, you start to get signals once again through the thalamic reticular nucleus, same area that puts things to sleep by sending signals to kind of inhibit activity, will bring things back by sending signals again to restore activity. And you see here a particular gene, KDM5A, is thought to be associated with one of these triggers as well. We'll talk about that one a lot more later. Yeah, now that was a really quick run through on the physiological side of sleep. We wanted to set that biological basis. We're going to be coming back to a lot of this stuff in other sections, but we needed that foundation first. We're basically going to explode all of this as we talk about everything else. So next up, next video, let's talk about the actual functions of sleep, what sleep seems to be doing for us, and what's going on while we're in it.